Evening, guys. Hiya. Welcome to the Glasgow Azure user group. I'm Sarah. I run this group. But tonight, in conjunction with the SQL Glasgow guys, we brought you here to talk about files and what to do with them in Azure and the data platform. So Craig's one of the guys that organises the SQL user group.
Yep.
He's hiding in the corner.
As Sarah says, I run the Glasgow SQL user group with my friend Robert over there. We normally meet on Thursdays. We've got our next meet-up is in January, talking about data warehousing and kind of looking at some source control stuff as well. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, come along. We've also got a session in March on Power BI, which kind of crosses into Azure stuff as well. So
cool.
Lots of stuff on the horizon.
One of the guys that are supplying the beer tonight is Data Core. So they're just going to do a quick wee talk to explain who they are before we start the actual sessions. Okay.
Andy?
Offerings. But it's basically about maximising productivity in databases. The first iteration is about SQL Server running on Windows. Now, for you guys from Azure, you're probably thinking that's not very relevant, but you may be looking at moving workloads to Azure. You can run this as a virtual machine. It's in the Azure catalog. You can actually deploy a virtual machine with our software on it to get your workload accelerated and potentially look at some savings. So rather than just taking your workload and lifting and shifting it straight into the cloud, you can potentially do the work on fewer cores and therefore leverage those savings that cloud should be doing for you. Okay. So Andy Spencer, my colleague Rosario, we're just going to briefly talk to you about our product Max Parallel. Thanks.
Great, thanks Andy. Yeah, so it's Rosario Perry. I joined Datacore in April, worked with Declan, back of the room there before, in the Microsoft ecosystem with System Center. So we're here really to introduce Max Parallel for SQL Server and Azure for the first time. It was launched at Microsoft Ignite at the end of September. It's been validated by Microsoft, hence why they put it in the Azure cloud in the marketplace, so you can run it on a VM. You can get more performance from your VMs and look at maybe architecting a migration in a different way to a traditional approach. Ultimately, what we're saying here is, many organizations have transformed these industries and these markets with the launch of new technologies and new applications. And ultimately, it's generating more and more data. There's more and more stress and pressures on IT departments to back up this data, to innovate, to keep the lights on. They talk about this as being bimodal IT. So what we're saying with Datacore is that we're quite well positioned, both from our legacy around storage I/O virtualization, which is where we've been able to set records on the number of IOPS from storage through this replication of data through our legacy technology. And what we're launching here is Max Parallel for SQL Server, which has been designed to maximize application performance and workload productivity. So what we're saying is that you're not changing anything to SQL 2008 R2 that's running a patient record system in a hospital. We're not changing anything for Matasphere, which is a case management system for a law firm. All we're doing is we're introducing a piece of software. You introduce it once into your environment, you reboot your server. That could be when you're doing some maintenance on that server anyway, and it's a stop and start button. And what you're doing is you're on average getting 20 to 25% more throughput from that system. And you're all going to probably think, that sounds too good to be true. How are you doing that? And the way we're doing that is through an adaptive algorithm which allows us to bypass the Microsoft scheduler that does all of that clever read and write and how it handles those requests. The bigger the system, the bigger the workload, the more cores, the more concurrent users, we are able to really transform that type of process. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there, Andy, in terms of...
Yeah, just very quickly. So, as Rosario said, we're not actually requiring any modifications to SQL Server or hardware changes or anything like that, we basically run as a service within the operating system. And what that does is that to get I/O out of the CPU and into and out of the disk subsystem is within the OS a single-threaded interrupt-based process. So you've got a lot of processing happening up here, and it's all having to wait for this serial process going, yeah, I'll deal with you after I've done these 32 other things that I've got to do. So what we do is we have something called a poller that basically proactively goes and looks for I/O. It's constantly running. And it'll spin up more jobs, think of them as jobs, just to go and seek the I/O when there are idle cycles on the CPU. Okay. So as we mentioned, this can allow us to architect things like Azure workloads a bit differently, potentially fewer cores. We'll see a bit more on that a bit later.
Yeah, so this, just moving on to that, really, this is a typical challenge. So you've got an 8-core server, you've got concurrent tasks kicking off in that process, in that scenario. And what we're saying is that we're getting around that single-threaded approach to that process. So we are, with Max Parallel, we're able to put those, we talk about putting the cores at work in parallel. And that's really in a way, the crown jewels of what Max Parallel is doing, which means that we're getting more work done, we're not wasting those CPUs, and we're ultimately getting more performance from the system. So just to re-emphasize, again, we're not changing anything to the hardware. We're not re-indexing the database. We're not, writing new queries. We're not touching that. We're not intrusive to the database itself. This is just you give marketing a budget, and they always build lots of pretty pictures for you. But this is a before and after with Max Parallel. So again, it's not, you can't see the graphical animation here actually, unfortunately, because it's not running. But it's basically just showing you how, a bit like when we queue up and go and with our kids at the weekend, we go and buy tickets at cinema. If there's only one kiosk open, there's going to be congestion. There's not going to be as much traffic getting through that hall. And what we're doing is we're opening up those cores and just improving the overall experience and the overall performance of that process itself. So where's the best fit? Well, we just spoke about simultaneous users, many concurrent processes. So, we did some month-end reporting for an organisation last Thursday. So they implemented the product into their environment before month-end. The ordering process team at month-end were coming in at 7 in the morning, going home at 10 o'clock at night. With Max Parallel introduced, they came in at 9 and they left at 6:30. So that without making any changes to the system, just by introducing our product, they were able to get through that workload in a much faster period of time. Again, hardware changes, we're talking to some hospitals at the moment who don't have deep pockets to buy new hardware, to look at SSD, to look at getting consultants in necessarily. So we're an alternative to that solution that wasn't, they told us that wasn't available before, because they didn't really, they could continue to make changes to the system, but they didn't have something to really give it a boost in performance and maybe extend the life of that system for another couple of years, which in the NHS is quite important. Sorry, it's not moving forward, unfortunately. I'll just click through that. Oh, it's gone back a bit too far. There we are. So this is just a quick case that we'll take you through. So it's showing you how it's got the technical spec of the system, as you'll see there on the right-hand side. It's showing you, as we move up to 50 users, the average response times, the workload response times on that system start to become quite sluggish. It then goes on to talk about, by introducing some techniques around caching the database, how when you've got up to 60 users, the general overall performance was okay. But then as soon as that concurrent usage and that workload increased again, and by the way, we'll share these slides after today, so you can actually look at these in more detail. But the point is here that as the strain on the system increased, the response time started to have a problem, and the overall performance wasn't where it needed to be. So by introducing Max Parallel, ultimately, the summary is that as that user increased to around 150 users, the overall we worked the CPU harder, and we got more transactions and more throughput from that system. And just to close the loop on that, we just physically show how we ran out of CPU and how we maxed out at 47,000 transactions. So again, this is just a summary of that. Applications benefiting the most, I spoke to Declan, some of the guys earlier on, and before we started. It's not rocket science. It's anything that has a high workload. So we're talking to some online e-ticketing companies at the moment. We're talking to some retailers with different platforms. where the rows and rows of data in their systems are growing, and they're having more and more performance issues. And these are some sectors that we're working quite closely with at the moment, just in terms of some sort of validation. This is important to bring up because we've been invited to some of these user groups because the communities are quite interested in what this technology can bring to SQL environments, to Azure migrations, and we're getting a lot of interest, a lot of uptake from it. Microsoft are testing the product in Redmond as well. It's been in the Azure marketplace. You can run it on different versions of SQL, we're now going to be invited to the user group in Newcastle. We're going to be doing one in Reading at Microsoft. So it's growing, and the whole reason of being here today is just to educate you really and inform you about the product to start with. That's the real takeaway of what we're trying to achieve. This is again some before and afters with and without Max Parallel. As you can see, this is on some different versions of SQL Server. And I'd say the average, just to come onto this slide, what'd you say, Andy?
Yeah, 20 to 50%. Yeah, it's a bell curve as always with these things. Some will get less than that. It depends on the workload. It depends on exactly what the infrastructure is. Some will get more. We have one case where they got 200% improvement, which I don't think all the hardware in the world would have got them. But yeah, it's the average 20 to 50. Would you mind just going back one slide for me, Ross?
Yeah, sure.
And you can see that even on newer versions of SQL Server, so a highly optimized database like SQL Server 2016, we can still make a difference here, both in terms of the transactions and the new orders per minute. And again, for those of you who are here for the Azure side of things, we'll come on to how you can perhaps benefit as well.
This is also an interesting breakthrough. Yeah, you can take it, it's fine.
Sure. So, and this really is sort of two ways to look at the business case for this. So this is a solution provider down in Reading called Ultima. They did a lot of testing for us, independent to us, completely independent. And they found that they could do more work on an 8-core machine than on a 20-core machine. Translate that to a business value, that means that they can save $30,000 on SQL Server standard licensing, $120,000 on SQL Server enterprise licensing, just on that one system. If you've got multiple systems, that's a lot of cores that you could potentially save on licensing. So now look at that as moving into Azure, rather than taking what you've got on-prem and saying, this is what I've got here, therefore that's what I must have in Azure, or AWS, or wherever your workload is. Let's re-architect that slightly. Let's go from that 20-core VM down to an 8-core VM and look at getting that performance that we've got here in the cloud, and therefore leveraging those benefits that moving to cloud should give you, so savings over running everything on-prem.
Yeah, it's just really introducing the licensing. Not surprising, it's mirroring SQL Server, so it's per core, and there's a version for standard and a version for enterprise. So in summary, Declan said this before, we're embedding ourselves into SQL Server in effect. We're not touching it, we're not impacting the way it's designed, but we are really just making the performance, we're improving the performance, we're improving the overall flow of data and the way in which these processes are being handled. And the bigger, more complex the processes, on average, the bigger impact we'll make. We did some testing on a 6-core system. We didn't really make much difference. You translate that into 52-core system, big systems, we're making much more of a difference to that. Yeah, so that's really just a quick summary, really, and thank you for the opportunity to stand up and introduce it for the first time. So, unless anyone has any questions, we'll hand over to the next session.
Thanks very much.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. What's the IP? What's your IP? What's the sort of Microsoft developing whatever you've got and then putting you guys out of business very quickly?
Nothing at all, but we reckon it's about a 6-year development cycle. We've been doing this for 20 years in our software-defined storage. Our founders came from a parallel compute background in a company called Aintor, founded Datacore approximately 20 years ago, 20 years next year. We've been doing it for a long period of time. You're right, yeah, there's IP there, so it's patented. We have a rich history of patent innovation. We invented our
Patented IP is already visible.
Okay, very good. Yeah.
And this is all IaaS. Are Microsoft looking at you to actually provide the same kind of improvements on their PaaS services? Or?
We're talking to Microsoft at that sort of level in Redmond, about not only improving a deployed VM, but improving, the way they can look at running Azure and the way they can look at running PaaS. So.
And
the other point just to mention, which we haven't touched on, is as well as enterprise customers using SQL Server, the other area we're getting a lot of interest in is ISVs. So organisations out there who are running their businesses, say, pick an example, Sage ERP as a platform, X3 and some of those product lines that Sage have. A lot of their customers are coming to them complaining about performance of Sage as a brand. The issue is not Sage, the issue is what Sage is running on, which is this SQL Server platform. So what we're doing there is we're seen as almost like a performance booster, like an acceleration to Sage, to improve the performance and customer satisfaction and retention of that product brand. The same concept applies to Microsoft Dynamics, SharePoint and various others. So just have that in your mind as well, just in terms of if you are in those industries where this may resonate in terms of performance acceleration.
And this is just the first iteration. In the new year we're going to have a version for SQL Server on Linux. And then it's going to be other databases, so Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, etc. So any of those sort of workloads, either if they're on-prem or in cloud, could benefit from this technology.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
So I've been running an event today, and I've done both of these presentations already today. The guys who I didn't, who have already had 3 pints, expect heckling. And it's the noisy ones on the left-hand side, or your right-hand side. So my name's Ed Baker. I'm an ex-Microsoftie. I now work for myself and do about 80% of the stuff I used to do, but do it for myself, and I do it for Microsoft, because they've changed. One of my little gigs at the moment is Microsoft have got an address called serverguy@microsoft.com, which they've branded as me, and they pay me to do a 5-hour SLA on any question on server. So I challenge you. Any questions on server 16, I ought to add. Not the old stuff, not the old stuff. Okay. And anybody wants a question on FRS, I won't answer it. So I've titled this little ditty, File Wars. Because what I'd put on the original one was so long I didn't really want to type it again. But what I'm going to cover today is a brand new preview service, brand new at Ignite, Azure File Sync, which is a service that allows you to synchronize and run a really fast, efficient cloud tiering and disaster recovery solution with nothing more than some file servers and an Azure file store. And also, because I was talking about files and because Microsoft have created this new group called Microsoft OneDrive Experts, and we're supposed to go out and evangelize OneDrive. It was files, so I thought I'd add the new OneDrive features on the end as a little add-in. And they're pretty cool too, so I'll talk about those. Azure File Sync. Who uses DFSR and DFS namespaces in your environment at the moment to spread your files around? It's not overly complicated, but it's not the simplest solution. I ought to add, actually, they don't normally let me talk in front of SQL-y type people because I sort of feed down here. I don't do the data stuff at the top. So if it doesn't come across, please shout at me. So Azure File Sync allows you to take a standard Azure SMB file share in a standard storage account, create a new service called a sync service, which can cater for more than one storage account, and connect that by means of agents to any server that's running Server 2012 R2 or Server 2016. And I'll show you what it does. We all know that file sharing and file storage costs you loads of money and it costs you a load of time and it's really difficult. You're concerned about backing up, you're concerned about recovering files, and you're also concerned about having a global solution or a solution across all of your environment. So here's my Azure File Sync. I have a standard file server with maybe the root, might just be a folder with some subfolders that are shared. If I start running out of space, I'm in trouble. If your file server fills up, your server stops and you don't have access to your files. If the file server breaks, you don't have access to your files. So what we do is we create a file share running in Azure, running in a storage account. It does do SMB3. So you can use it for standard SMB3 shares. When it first came out, it was SMB 2.1. If you're taking Azure exams, just be aware now it is SMB3. It's fully functional. However, the NTFS permissions that sit here, this only works on NTFS, no REFS yet. NTFS permissions down here do not replicate up here. It's in hand, it's being developed, it's not quite there yet. So I now have a server that's running out of space, and I can cloud tier it. I can say, I want to maintain 30% free space on my server. I tell Azure File Sync that, and immediately what it does is it goes and removes all of the cold files on this server and leaves symbolic links. And they're all stored up here. If an application or a user wants those files, they can still see them, the namespace is still present, and they can access them and grab them. And then I can do something really clever. I can add another site. It can be on the same site, it can be anywhere on the planet. I just plug in a new server, install the agent, which takes 5 minutes maximum, connect the agent to the same file share, and it becomes a server endpoint. And immediately the whole namespace is available on this server. Not just the files that don't exist, the whole namespace. So within 5 minutes of connecting it, the users have access to the entire namespace and all of the files. If they aren't yet synced and they're not present, it just downloads them on demand. A little bit like OneDrive files on demand. You can use NFS and SMB, so if you're a Linux head, you can use it as an NFS share if you want to. Users can use it, applications can use it. And you can also connect it if you're anybody using work folders still? Some do, some don't. It's sort of dropping off the planet a bit. It will connect to work folders. You can also access the files directly from the file share. So you can use your IaaS virtual machines and share that as a file share into a VM or an application using PaaS. The thing it doesn't tell you in the manual is that anything you put in here only updates and synchronizes once every 24 hours because the file change notification job up here happens once a day. Down here, it happens almost instantaneously, and deletes are instantaneous. So if you want to move things or copy things from server to server, stick it on a server and it will happen immediately. If you want to precede something and you don't care if it happens within 24 hours, you can just drop it into the file share if you want to. Now imagine the situation where this server just breaks completely. I've already copied it within 5 minutes there. So I now just place a brand new server in its place, download the agent, connect it to the same file share, the namespace appears, and while it's syncing, all of those files are immediately available. So it's not even oh sorry, the server's dead, I've got to copy all the files back. The namespace appears instantly. You can create snapshots on the file share, and in hand in development is the ability to take those snapshots and integrate them with Azure Backup Vaults. You can't do that yet, but you will soon be able to do that so that you can you can put it into protection and it will automatically do lots of different recovery points to be able to recover previous files as well. I have to sit down for this bit because I'm old and I can't see the screen when I'm standing up, so I'm just about to demonstrate this, I apologise. So we have here a mouse that's ceased functioning. Okay, we'll use that then. We have here an Azure file share. Okay, thank you. That's why that's happened. It suddenly stopped doing it. Normally when you come out of presentation mode, it goes back down to... No. Now, I was joking about the heckling. So let's duplicate the screen, lovely picture. And go back up to my... Right, can you see that? I can't turn my head all over. Right, that is a standard Azure file share. In it is a 5 gig VHD. That VHD has been replicated from the server. So if I go down to my server, you can see here I have a folder called C shares AFS, and that has a file in it. I'm going to delete that file. And while I'm talking about the process. I've still got internet, so it should work quicker than that. It will refresh it and it will disappear. So it's gone already in from Azure. And the hierarchy of this is because you can have a storage sync service with more than one storage account, you have to have an object that sits above the storage account. So you've got a storage sync service, then storage accounts. This is my sync service. And within the sync service, I can have a number of storage sync groups. I have a storage sync group. Each storage sync group can have a number of cloud endpoints. That's simply a share running within Azure Files. And it can have a number of server endpoints. So this server endpoint here is the one I'm using. And if I click it and look at it, you can see that cloud tiering is disabled. I'm not running out of space. I don't need it. So here, I could enable it and enable 20% free space, which means that the moment it starts running out of space, it will move all those files up to Azure and leave a symbolic link on my server. To be able to get to that point, you go to registered servers and you add a server. And the way you do that is you download the agent, install it on the server. It downloads an MSI file with two different MSIs, a 12R2 and a 16. And as soon as you've registered it, it becomes available to use as a server endpoint. So let's go back to my server endpoint and go to the D drive and go to VHDs and grab a random disk from my storage space direct and copy it into AFS shares early enough so it does it. It's going to copy there. And within a couple of minutes or so, it will appear in my sync group. Note, I've got all the usual things I have in an Azure resource. I can create all of this using JSON and ARM templates. I can give access management using full RBAC with Azure Active Directory. So for instance, if I look at my automation script for this service, your standard template appears and your standard parameters, and you can just copy it, save it into your file, and rename it and redeploy it at will. Okay, let's go back to my group. I have no features with the cloud endpoint other than deleting it. It won't let you delete a service or a group until you've deleted the cloud endpoint. And there's nothing, I actually had to go back to the product team and say, how can I delete it? I click delete and it doesn't let me. There's no ellipsis, but you right click and delete it. Didn't even think of that, because I was clicking delete. I thought delete, that'll delete everything. No, it doesn't delete it. So they're going to change the interface there to make it a little bit more intuitive. If I go to my storage accounts, wherever they are, right at the top, where have I put them there? And my server guy storage, and my file share. And refresh it. It may take a little longer. I don't know what the upload speed is here actually. I was on Wired earlier, wasn't I?
You're dangerous playing about with a 5 gig file. I'm going 5 meg.
See, that's the difference, you see. Just take the flak. So I'm going to leave that while I talk, and we'll come back to that and make sure it does work, because I won't do a demo that doesn't work, he hopes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about file sync. In fact, let's come out of that and do Windows P. And extend it so I can see my slide deck and present it better. Okay, so Azure File Sync. You can centralize all of your files in Azure storage if you want to. I did some costings. There are costs to storing things in Azure, obviously. If you use the standard local replication, so 3 copies in one region, 1 terabyte, in the UK, which is obviously the most expensive place you can store anything, 22% more. Don't store anything in Britain, it's too expensive. It's 57 quid a month for 1 terabyte. There are then data charges for every time you do something with that data, but they're in the tenths and hundreds of pence per time. So you're not going to generate masses of expense by doing this. You can cache it in multiple places. You can have the same file share throughout the same site or in multiple sites if you want to. Stand up again now. You can use your cloud-based backup and you can use FastDR. So to do this with DFS, you would need WAN links and you would need a robust, you'd have to have a lot of discussion about whether you were going to use hubs and stars and spokes and how you were going to do it. And one node here disappears, it makes no difference whatsoever. You lose the wrong node in DFS and things go very badly. Want to know any more about it? aka.ms/AFS. Gives you all the skinny, you can download everything and play with it. So that's a very quick run through, and I'll just take you back to the files to make sure it's uploaded in a minute on Azure File Sync. But if we talk about files from the other end, from the user's perspective, how many Office 365 users have we got here? Okay, I'll change that. How many non-Office 365 users have we got here? About 4 or 5 of you, okay? So anybody with Office 365, whether they be consumer Office 365 or an Office 365 business or enterprise plan, will have OneDrive. If you're an enterprise or business plan, you'll have OneDrive for business. If you are a consumer, you'll have 1 terabyte of consumer storage. There are differences between the two. Certainly within Microsoft, you cannot store anything above low business impact data in OneDrive Consumer because it doesn't have encryption at rest yet. It has encryption when it moves, but it's not encrypted at rest, whereas OneDrive for Business is encrypted at rest. A few stats. This is taken from the Ignite presentation. 250 billion plus files stored in OneDrive. And if you think how, I'm going to say it, how bad it used to be compared to how good it is now, it wasn't the world's best solution and it did break for a long time. And the sync on OneDrive for Business wasn't the world's best. It's now very good. So you've stuck with us and it's worthwhile because you'll see what you get in a minute. 300 million downloads on the mobile apps and 34 million new active users in 1 month alone in August. 34 million users. So they like the product. Number of changes in the last year, significant. They've cheated here because they've added the SharePoint ones in there. SharePoint and OneDrive for Business team are pretty much synonymous with each other. Masses and masses of big beneficial changes. And that all came about from this thing. Does anybody not know about User Voice? Uservoice.com. User Voice is the tool that Microsoft uses for most of its products to receive positive and negative feedback, mostly negative and mostly suggestions. Nobody gives positive feedback to Microsoft. And suggestions for new products. And the number one suggestion for OneDrive wasn't use Dropbox, it was OneDrive files on demand, please. So out of the 42,000, 26,000 wanted files on demand, which Microsoft gave you in October the 17th, I think it was. Was it October the 17th? When did it came out with the new 1709 Windows Fall Update Creators Edition thing? Middle of October.
Still waiting for Server 2016.
Say again?
Still waiting for Server 2016 support.
For what? For the on demand. It's not designed for that, but yeah, okay, it's coming. It's not designed for that.
Forget who I work for?
No. So the number one, and it was October the 17th, I've got a memory after all. But what's new? What have we done? Number one, files on demand. I'll demonstrate it in a minute, but this has a 256 gig SSD in. It had 3 gigabytes spare. I downloaded the new Creators update. It didn't actually the first time. I had to download the client a couple of times. Sometimes it works immediately, sometimes it doesn't, if you've got the older client on. As soon as the new client was on, I just pointed at OneDrive and went, save space for the whole OneDrive. It gave me 200 gig back. So I've got what did we do earlier? 229 gig, and there was 6 gig stored on here. And it just takes it off and stores it in OneDrive only. Support for DRM. Multi-geography is in, it's not quite there yet, it's in the works, it's very good. Service level encryption with your own key. So you can encrypt at rest in OneDrive for Business with your own key. You don't have to use the Microsoft key. And in consumer, when they bring in support for storage at rest, they will also try and bring in that. They haven't committed to that yet, but that's what they're after. Auto account configuration, which is huge when you look at Autopilot. Autopilot allows you to pre-provision a device. Your user signs in with their credentials. It sets up their accounts. It sets them up into Intune management. It joins them to Azure Active Directory. And as part of that, it downloads a files on demand namespace of their OneDrive. So within minutes of logging on for the first time, all their files appear. And when they want them, they click and they download. Very much like replacing a file sync server. So that's huge productivity advancement. Instead of, oh, well, you've got to go and sort your files out. It does it automatically for you in Autopilot. On-premises Windows and Android app. There are something like 116, maybe more now, file previewers now. So you can even preview CAD and CAM files without having the app that you store in OneDrive. And you can preview them in cloud viewers, which is cool. Photo intelligence for OneDrive for Business. They haven't yet got the auto upload off your phone into OneDrive for Business with your photos, but they can do that into OneDrive Consumer. Sharing notifications, zip file. You can store things in a zip file in OneDrive, and you don't have to download the file to open it to look at it. It will view the zip file so you can see the files inside without. That's been a long time in coming. Office for Mac, there's now a client included as well. Huge one, independent, user-driven file restore. You can restore to a point in time on your previous file versions for 30 days on any deleted file from the OneDrive web client. What else have we got? I'm going to go over that because I'm not talking SharePoint. And this is the Microsoft 365 powered device. So Windows Autopilot automatically connects you to all of these services, automatically gives you access to all of them. You can see here the icons. For files on demand, those are online only, locally available, and always available. So when you say always store on my device, you get the green solid one. When you just download one, you get a slightly green tick. So here's the Autopilot solution. It's not going to do anything. I've tried this about 4 times. It doesn't do anything. There we are. There we go. Autopilot. All you do is choose the keyboard. It'll ask you to choose a second keyboard. If you're really lucky, Cortana will be talking to you all the time it's doing this. Anybody witnessed that yet? Looks for updates.
Is this you running this live?
Say again?
Is this you running this live?
Do I look mad? Well, I do, but I'm not that mad. Okay, you put your details in. Normally I would run all demos live and have videoed backup ones, but this is just part of the slide presentation. As soon as you've entered your credentials, it joins you to Azure Active Directory. If you're using Intune, it will automatically put you into Intune management. If you're using a third-party one that's connected to Azure AD, it will use that as well. You go through this. You love this experience, don't you? You just love this experience. If there's one thing that annoys me in anything to do with Microsoft Windows updates, it's that. Every time. And then the moment you've logged on, you have to set up the options in Intune and set up the options for Autopilot. The moment it's done it, everything is available. I don't know why I'm doing it, because it's just going to show you exactly what I told you was there. Come on. Feels like it's live, doesn't it? It feels it's that slow. You need that ×2 button. Yes, get on with it. Click Start. All your files are there. You can organise your start screen exactly as you want it. Notice we get the new files on demand icon here. And because you already have files on demand, it will automatically download it, and it's about to tell you it's under Intune management. There you go, connected. Right, I'm coming out of that now. That's going on too long. Okay. and let's show you what it does. So, let's do it right this time. So here is my OneDrive. I've got two on here. I've got OneDrive for Business and I've got OneDrive Personal. If I right click on OneDrive Personal and go to Properties, you can see it, when it counts up, 240 gigabytes size, taking up 6.5. That's not deduped, that's just not there. They're just symbolic links pointing to the files. Anything with a cloud, the other benefit, of course, is that you can now see instantly which ones are shared. That was a real pain with your OneDrive. You couldn't see what was shared. Often you had to go to what you share on the OneDrive client, on the OneDrive web app. Don't want to do that anymore, so you can now see. So if I go into a folder and I choose something nice and small, I'll choose a file rather than a folder. I'll go off my invoicing, I don't want to do that. Let's choose a Word file called DevOps. How about that? That's wonderful. If I right click it, I can now say clear space. Currently it's available. It's now going to sync and say, well, I don't need you anymore, I'm going to send you up to the cloud. So that will give me a cloud icon, and it's ditched it already. The other one, DevOps 1, I now want to make always available on this device. And it will always now make that available on the device. The others that are light green are files that I have used, so they've been downloaded, and they can be synced back up and got rid of. If I now go to a cloud file somewhere, I haven't got any down there. I'll go into a folder for cloud. I'll pick there you go. So it's OneDrive, sorry, OneNote. I'm going to go to that folder. I'm going to open OneNote. And I'm going to File, Open, Browse, Paste, choose that one. Notice it's immediately downloading it and it will open. It will then mark that as available, not stored. So just because it's not on there doesn't mean it's not available to an application. And OneNote is doing the download. Start running out of space and you can get rid of the ones that are available if you want to. There's no difference with that than there is with the OneDrive for Business. Right click on there. I think I've got all of my OneDrive Business, I've got all of it, it's only 8 gig in it, set to store on this device because this is the one I use for work more than anything, so I keep all of those on there. And actually most of those are IT camp files. What else do we do? Sarah, shout at me if I don't know what my finish time is, but so we now have, mine isn't active on my live one at the moment. It hasn't synced around yet. I'm not on obviously one of those lucky early clients. But if you go into your own OneDrive through Office 365 for Business, click on Home, it'll give you what your files are, what you've edited, what you've kept, what you've deleted, all your local messages, and how many active users of your files and active accounts. And that's on the admin center. If you go to your own, back to the admin center again, sorry, you can now choose, that's a really shocking slide, apologies for that. You can choose how you share within your environment, who gets to see what, whether they can view and edit by default, and how you share them. And one of the better ones is the ability to recover as a user. You no longer have to go and say, please, Mr. Admin, I've deleted that file, can I have it back? Much as you can do it on premises now with previous versions, you can also do it with OneDrive for Business. File restore. Any file you have deleted in the last 30 days can be recovered, up to the last second. So ransomware, it won't be synced up there. You can bring down all your files that you got that you lost. Do it through here, restore my OneDrive, choose the day, copy your files. dead easy. And probably you can't see any of that because it's so small. Pick your files, restore, job done. If you want to know more about OneDrive, you've got your business one, consumer one, which is all done through the tech community, and also the user voice. Anybody not use OneDrive? I mean, I use Box, I use Dropbox, and I use OneDrive. And it's nice to see a lot of the mobile apps now are including the features natively built in for that, certainly the Microsoft apps. Any questions on either file sync or OneDrive?
I still don't find it anywhere near reliable enough. We have stopped selling 365 because I'm still having problems with it.
Stop selling 365 completely? Problems with which bits?
OneDrive.
What, just with OneDrive for Business?
Yeah.
Recently?
Since Thursday, my laptop showing all my files is glued with the arrows. Just sitting there, glued with the arrows.
The arrows like that?
Yeah. I've got clients where I can't log in. I've got clients where
Shocking.
it resyncs everything.
There was a problem the other day with Skype for Business where a user got an email saying, yeah, we'll fix that in around 3 weeks. It's not a really good response. I have to say that a lot of the issues are tenant related. So you may just have a tenant. Is it an older tenant or a newer tenant, or does it happen across? Yeah.
No, I mean, another machine decided to resync everything every time you started it. We're resyncing everything.
And that's on the new Windows 1709.
No, that's in 7. That was in 7 with the new client.
Yeah.
So we've been back to map drives and maybe looking forward to a new team client to your files because we're not doing any more. Client.
Interesting. Have you tried resolving it with them?
Yeah, I reported the resyncing issue and it was uninstall, reinstall.
Could you give me your details before you go, and I'll put you in touch with Stephen Rose, who he manages OneDrive from a
No, I put 2 questions in that
user voice.
tech community.
Oh, tech community, right?
And I was told to go to social.microsoft.lab.
Oh, you don't want to go there. No. Give me your details, and I'll put you directly in touch with Stephen,
Cool.
because he basically runs the team.
Yeah,
They want as much negative. It sounds terrible. They want as much negative feedback personally as they can get, because not many people like you. I mean, you've probably tried but gone the wrong route, and they don't hear it.
yeah,
And if the development teams don't hear it,
my queries have been there and not been noticed.
yeah.
Yeah.
Tech community is supposed to be all singing. All, not convinced yet. Not convinced yet.
Once the negative feedback, then I'll carry on with this. If you've got multiple SharePoint sites that are for different clients,
Yep.
trying to actually sync with those is a complete nightmare. You can go one at a time where you can get none at all. But
Funny enough, that works for me.
I have to say, a lot of it, and it's no help to any of you. A lot of it is individual tenant related. I've got one of my tenants that just is a nightmare for anything I ever try and do, and I'm going to close it and start a new one. I'm just going to give up. But it's a demo trial tenant, but it's like it just doesn't do what I want it to do. 12 months ago, I would have entirely agreed with you.
well,
It should.
as a consultant going into
Oh.
a site and saying, oh, just get another tenant.
Ed,
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do that. No.
Ed, on the same note, why is the OneDrive consumer client so good? And then the OneDrive for business SharePoint client so shit? Because I use both for ages, and I know you're saying you've improved,
Yeah.
but
It has improved
it seemed
massively.
like one technology was great, but they never decided to take that and implement it for the other.
The
Looking for your
underlying
value.
infrastructure of the two products are entirely different. Therefore, the sync clients have to be entirely different, and it's much. This is guesswork. It's much easier to produce the rounded solution from the consumer one, because the infrastructure at the back of it is less challenging than the SharePoint one.
I think our experience was just in the gentleman said there, I think 12 months ago, I probably stood up here and said, yeah, it's shit.
Yeah.
Our experience is that the first problem is the Groove client, because obviously the Groove.
The what client?
I thought it was a new media player when it came out.
You mean the one that's gone?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So Groove, the first problem was Groove. Earlier on this year, you could go, you were saying with the tenants, there were browsing and all the tenants, you could go and change it to the new client.
Yep.
Also, if you rename Groove to legacy, that just made sure the thing did not resurrect that and improve things. We've been piloting with the customer for about a month now, the new 709 OneDrive branches here, demo in there, and it's like chalk and cheese compared to the previous one.
It's positive, you mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think, I mean, honestly, I'm coming up from we've been early adopters, we've used it, we know all this early issues.
I have to say,
20,000 files in a library.
you're saying your problems are Windows 7. I know exactly why.
Who's gone?
No, but who's going to be
Right.
it's built.
Okay,
It's
well,
built. This is now built into Windows 10.
So yeah, so the one with the blue arrows there, it's been there since Thursday.
Yeah.
Is Windows 10.
Is it the new 1709? Yeah. But we'll get that one sorted. Well, they want to know the ones that are going wrong. So anyway, thank you guys.
We've
That's
seen
the
that as
general.
well with the blue arrows. We've actually seen that. It just sits there, and you think it's like synchronizing.
It's not doing anything. The blue cloud thing, that icon is just sitting there. Not doing anything. So.
Can I ask a general question?
Yes, of course.
If you're a traditional organisation like maybe many of us are, you know, where you've got your file server, file shares, domain joined devices, people log on, map drives, and you want to change this. Well, obviously the challenge then is people are out of your domain, out of your network, how you access the files. We're looking at this kind of technology to try and achieve that. So you've got Azure AD join laptops, let's say. Where does, I mean, this is obviously what makes it very interesting, the Azure file share, that's interesting, but still syncing down to a file share on premises.
So the good news,
challenges, what new ways are there?
So the good news, the really good news, is that with 1709 onwards, you can now Azure AD join and AD join a device. So you can traditionally manage and start moving your devices to, effectively, they're going to want modern management for everything. That's the way they want it to go, I think. Because there's now the ability to have an Intune tenant that has both Config Manager and Intune Cloud Management, which you couldn't have before. So by having the Config Manager gateway. So they're trying to make it as easy as possible to wean yourself off what you've done for 30 years to manage it better and in a different way.
Speaking to customers this week, there's still so many customers that have a P drive, personal, a G drive for group, an H drive, and it's almost going to have to break in that mentality and have this new way, but there needs to be almost one.
So I was with a customer on Monday because I decided to spend a week here. So it's a charity up in Alloa, and they have Office 365 charity pricing already. They're not using any of it. They're using the Pro Plus on their desktops, and they've got file shares in 4 disparate offices with crappy WANs that don't synchronize properly. And I just say, well, just use this. Just take it off them. Leave the files there. Remove their access to those folders. Give them the new one and say, this is how you do it. See what happens.
It's hellishly confusing for users because they run the Office suite, they go to File Open, they open a file locally on disk. They can go to Office 365 port, open it from there. They can sync it down to OneDrive, then they have to open it from the OneDrive.
The best thing to do is to configure all of your apps and all of your solutions to use your OneDrive as your documents folder. Once you've done that, everything resides in the OneDrive.
That only helps for personal documents, doesn't help for group sharing.
True.
And then you're talking about SharePoint Online or co-authoring documents for Office 365, etc.
Which goes in, but you can use it for OneDrive for business.
For what traditional enterprises do at the moment.
It's very confusing. I mean, we want to start leveraging this technology, but what we're finding is we need to come up with what's best practice. We will have to kind of tell them, do this.
But the problem is each organisation is going to... So Microsoft now have a group, have an organisation, and I've forgotten, it's ACS, Adoption and something service. No, Adoption and... I don't know what it's gone. No, they're effectively change managers, and they go into large organisations who have already bought the stuff but not implemented it yet and say, right, this is... who is going to be your change champion for, like the military? You've done this, try to change that organisation. You've done this, and this. We're now giving you that you can work in all these ways. Who's going to do that? How are you going to do it? Because you have to put it in. You have to hand the problem to the customer to some degree and say, this is a change. It's not just a new product, it's a change in the way you work. And if you don't want to do that, don't buy the product. You might just as well buy the box product of Office and not go anywhere with it. So this organisation has a VM with Exchange on, and they have not got one user in hybrid yet. They've just not gone. They've got it, and they're backing up Exchange to external USBs. And I'm going, So if there's a fire, you have nothing. And I mean absolutely nothing, because you can't guarantee, in fact, everything goes to that USB, which goes
It's
into
sitting
it.
on top of the server.
Well, no, it's sitting in a different room on a shelf, and there's 4 of them, and every night, the one from the previous night goes in the safe. I said, where's the fire marker? It's not a fireproof safe. It's like, that's gone. So I've got to write that report on Friday. That's going to be interesting. But it's just a matter of how you have to sell them the art of the possible on what it will do, and not just say, there it is, I've sold it. In addition,
access to services from anywhere really is what we're,
so with Microsoft now, and you're going to find this very soon, there is almost nobody in the whole of the UK that works for Microsoft who is bonused on anything but Azure consumption. Not Azure sales, consumption. So an enterprise salesman can sell 10 million quid's worth of, is this still recording? 10 million quid's worth of Azure, and they won't get paid their bonus until it is being used, which is brilliant for the customers, because you now actually have to just not go away, oh, I've sold that, I've made my money. You actually have to get it working and deployed, and great. Do more of it. Adoption and something service. Oh, I need to remember that. Anyway, thank you. I was between you and beer and beer and pizza, and it's here.
We've got pizzas on the right, guys, and there's beer and juice on the left, so get yourselves and we'll have a wee bit, okay?
Yeah, can you?
come back and have a seat. I will introduce myself first of all. My name is Robert French. I am one of the co-organisers of the SQL Azure user group with my colleague here, Craig, who introduced earlier. I'm going to introduce Stephen Amory. We are very excited to have Stephen. He is a Cloud Solutions Architect. Thank you very much for prompting me. A little while ago we were very, very lucky to have Greg Lowe, who's a Regional Director in Australia, coming speaking to our group. And as a result we got incredibly excited for Azure. Azure is a wonderful product. A little bit of selling about our group. We have a couple of sessions coming up. If anyone's worked with Power BI, you may know about someone called Adam Saxon. If you've heard of Adam Saxon, it's the guy in the cube. We have been speaking at the SQL Server user group in the 22nd of March. That's a little fanboy moment for me because I've followed him for quite a while. We've also got another couple of sessions coming up. We've got looking at data warehouse on the 18th of January, and myself and Craig will be heading to SQL Bits. If you haven't heard of SQL Bits, it's one of the premier conferences on SQL in the UK. If you're interested in SQL, I would go. And I will stop talking now and I will hand over to Stephen. Thank you very much for coming to speak to us this evening.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Can you all hear me okay? Is the microphone working? Yeah, so Stephen Amory, I'm a cloud solution architect. I work for Microsoft, and I'm one of the number that Ed mentioned who don't get paid if you don't use your Azure commitment. Okay, so I've come along here today to talk to you about Azure SQL, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and Cosmos DB. Now, the thing that connects these three services together is they're all managed database offerings. Okay, that means that Microsoft are responsible for everything below the line of the database engine, including the database engine. So we've got Azure SQL Database, which is a relational database in the traditional mode, which is scalable and available and provides transactional consistency for application developers. We've got Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and the clue's in the name. It's really a data warehousing style workload that it copes with, and it's designed to handle massively parallel processing. So a quick question, does anybody know, hands up anyone who knows massively parallel processing, who's familiar with that? Okay. So MPP I'll cover a little bit more, but it's an entirely different way of managing scale. And then we've got Azure Cosmos DB, which is a break with tradition for Microsoft in a way. It's not a relational database. It's part of the NoSQL movement, meaning not only SQL. And that is a globally distributed multi-model database, and I'll explain those terms to you later as well. But it's something of a diversion for Microsoft over the last few years. So what is Azure SQL Database? It's really targeted at application developers. Okay? So as an application developer, you're going to want to be able to stand up a database, have it do exactly what you want, when it wants, and be able to go from test, dev, into production with some degree of confidence. When it comes to maintenance and management, it's designed to adapt itself, to manage itself, to reduce the workload for management and administration. So a company called IDC did a survey of the use of Azure SQL Database, and these are the findings they've made. So they think that 47% of staff time has been reclaimed by the likes of DBAs and administrators from the more traditional management of said databases. They're looking at a 75% improvement in speed of development through to deployment, which if you think about it, as a developer, the ability to stand up, develop, test, and then have a fluid line through to deployment is a major benefit to you. A reduction in total cost of ownership. If you think about it, when you buy an on-premise device, certainly you're having to scale to the largest workload of that device, whereas with Azure SQL, you're only scaling to the actual demand that you're getting. And then finally, and last but no means least, you're looking at 71% fewer unplanned outages with Azure SQL Database. Okay? That's because Microsoft manage from the database down. Okay? So when would you use it? So we've got 4 use cases here. One is if you're developing a cloud-borne software as a service, and you perhaps wanted to implement multi-tenant applications. So for instance, if you wanted a database for each one of your clients to satisfy some security or privacy needs, or even to just reduce the risk of a noisy neighbour syndrome. If you're an independent software vendor, if you've developed a traditional software package and you're wanting to move to a more subscription-based model, then Azure SQL is a good target for your re-architecture. And then with the sort of more traditional enterprise approach, if you're an enterprise business and you're wanting to serve applications to your customers, it's a good tool for handling that. And then finally, if you're wanting to just develop tools for in-house, then the database platform will support that. And I think those 4 cases pretty well cover all of the workloads that a traditional relational database can be used for. And there's over 2 million of them currently in use. So Microsoft have now got the hang of managing other people's databases. And if something occurs, the chances are Microsoft will know about it before you do. So your database on autopilot, what does that mean? That means that you're not responsible for infrastructure maintenance, you're not responsible for security and software patching, you're not responsible for feature updates, you're not responsible for disaster recovery and failover, and you're not responsible for backups. We handle all that. So that gives you a fully managed solution, no application downtime because we manage these processes ourselves. We have set systems for doing these updates that don't require your database to go offline. So this saves you money, time and worry. You know, the fear of your database not being backed up overnight should be reduced or abated. So on the subject of security, we have a number of components that are available. We provide for intelligent threat detection. That is the ability to identify that something like a SQL injection attack is taking place on your database. We have built-in behavioural analysis. So if you have a client or a client application that typically only goes to a certain table, and then all of a sudden it takes a very keen interest in the credit cards table and wants to copy the lot of them, then this will be reported. Okay? We have an explorable audit log. So that means all of your activities on your database can be recorded for later reading through later, or for going through later and exploring. And then finally, we've got the vulnerability assessment tool. So when you've created your Azure SQL database, you can use that and it will tell you what threats it's seeing, what suitable mitigations are, and actually implement them for you if appropriate. So in terms of self-tuning, we have this managed database that's capable of identifying poorly performing queries, for instance. And it can let you know suitable actions associated with that. And that might be the creation of an index, it might be the removal of an index. And it can carry out those actions at your request, but it can also do that automatically. So what does that mean? If you put it in full auto mode, it will actually go ahead and create indexes where it feels they're appropriate. Now, obviously, it has an expectation of what that performance benefit will be, and if it doesn't see that, it will reverse out that decision. So it's using more than just a dumb decision-making process. It's making value judgments about the effectiveness of these tuning approaches. And then finally, we've got adaptive query processing, which is baked into the more modern versions of SQL, which create just cannier query approaches, cannier query plans. So from a developer's point of view, again, this is all about the developers, really. From a developer's point of view, they just say, well, look, this thing's secure, and it's managing itself. It's automatically tuning itself. And from a DBA's point of view, and I've never met a DBA who isn't busy, this gets them to buy some time back, okay? So we don't hand over the entire range, but there are certain tasks that this can do for them. So imagine you've got a single database, and if you think about the workloads that are applied to databases, they can be very peaky, so you might find Monday mornings extraordinarily busy, Friday afternoons very quiet. You can scale your database to match that demand, or the demands that are being placed upon it. So unlike the traditional model, you don't need to scale to the maximum size, you right size to the appropriate size. But if you imagine you've got more than one database, say you've got 100 databases, and if you perhaps went down the multi-tenant route for your application development, you might have 100 individual customer databases. You wouldn't want to spend your entire life sliding up and down to fit what workloads you want. So this is where we've created the elastic database pool. You can put your databases into a pool, set an upper limit for the pool, and it will tune your databases within that pool. It will say this needs this amount of data throughput units or data transaction units. Okay. So again, from the developer's perspective, it supports all the popular languages, so that's Java, Python, Node.js, PHP, and C#, surprisingly. And it will work on Windows, Apple, and Linux. And you also get to use the tools that you're used to using as a developer. So that would be things like SQL Server Management Studio and Visual Studio. Okay. If you are wanting to do a migration from an existing deployment, whether that's from an on-premise SQL instance or an IaaS SQL, then there's some tooling there to help you. And in addition, if you wanted to come from a competitor database, like Oracle or DB2, we provide migration assistance and the database migration service to help you do that. Okay. So we've got layers of protection within Azure SQL. So first of all, we have data encryption at rest. So we use a thing called transparent data encryption. We also have transport layer security. So that means it's in flight and at rest, it's secure. We also have this concept of dynamic data masking. So for those of you who buy things on Amazon, you might be familiar with it, where it says, do you want to use a particular credit card? And that credit card might have 12 X's and then it ends with 1, 2, 3, 4. That's masking of data. And chances are, I don't know, chances are an application developer's had to do that, grab the credit card number and put the X's in. This bakes in that masking into the database, so that credit card number never leaves the database. It comes out masked, which means the application developer themselves doesn't get to see it, but it also means that their application never gets to see it, which is again reducing the surface area for attack. We have row-level security, so once you're signed in, it's able to identify who you are and what group memberships you have. You can then apply row-level security to ensure that, say, a UK employee is only seeing UK and a German employee is only seeing German data. And then finally, it's tightly integrated with Azure Active Directory and multi-factor authentication, which means that you're getting all the benefit of using of other devices to ensure that the person who's logging is the one they're saying they are. So in terms of mission critical availability, we offer a 4 nines SLA. We can take automatic backups. You can do point-in-time restore up to 35 days. That means you can just dial back to any point in the last 35 days and restore the database from there or to there. We provide active geo-replication and failover groups. That means that you can choose to replicate your database into another region in Azure, and in the event of a tidal wave hitting Dublin or something, we will expect to fail over, and we provide a recovery point objective of sub 5 seconds. And if you think of the scale of a disaster like that, that's not bad, is it, really? So that's Azure SQL Database. Now I'm going to sort of rush through this a little bit because I'd like to show you some of these things at the end. So Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now, a very different beast, still relational, still it's a sibling of SQL, of Azure SQL. In fact, I've heard it described as 60 SQL databases welded together. That's perhaps a little unfair. The thing about it is it scales to petabytes, okay, in terms of the data you can access, and it utilizes this technology called massively parallel processing. Now, things like SQL Server and other traditional relational databases are, I think, called SMP symmetric multiprocessing. They are vertical, which means if you want your machine to go faster, you basically get faster kit. Whereas massively parallel processing scales horizontally, which means you just get another server, and another server, and another server. And this is commodity kit. You're not talking crazy supercomputers here. You're talking standard kit just going side by side. So if you imagine if you can get 10 SQL servers working on a problem that one was previously handling, you can gain a 10 times increase in throughput. So that's the purpose of this. So it's effectively a batch processing tool. So whereas Azure SQL is your Ferrari, this is your JCB. Okay? This is your end-of-day batch processing tool. And I don't know, my experience with things like ETL, they always expand to fill the window. You know, you kick off at 6 and they finish at 5 to 9, if you're lucky. This is the tooling to deal with that. You can scale out and you can do that on demand again. So what you're going to do effectively is scale out to run your ETL and scale back down again to run throughout your normal day, or just pause it. So just have it do one thing, run a particularly beefy batch process, start it, run it, pause it. And you only pay for your storage and the compute you used in that intervening period. Okay, so you pay by the minute, effectively, for this service. Now, if you think about that, if we go back 5 years, 10 years, to be able to leverage massively parallel processing at this scale, you'd have had to buy sort of hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds worth of equipment, which explains a lot of the architectures we see now, because you would have been precluded from using this stuff. 2 people working out of a shed can now afford to do this, okay? Not just multi-billion-dollar businesses. Okay, you're talking dollars an hour. So it's, you know, you kind of there's a mindset change now needs to start to take place. So this is just giving you an idea of some of the workloads, but essentially we've got in standard tier, you can have a thing called 6,000 DWs. That just means 60 servers simultaneously running. You can have up to 60. And then in our compute variant, you can have 300 servers working concurrently on your batch processing task, 300. So again, just to reiterate, you can pause it. You don't need to over-provision, right? So if your job will scale to run on 10 in an hour, then just run it for 10 for an hour. You don't have to have 12 or less. You just pick the correct size to fit the profile of the task that you're carrying out. And you can pause it. So as with Azure SQL, it's fully compliant. It provides the threat detection, the connection security, the authentication, though full Azure Active Directory integration, I'm not aware of it being complete yet. Certainly it's in preview. Okay. And the encryption again is at rest and in flight, and again the auditing is the same as with Azure SQL, and you can see the sort of events that you can capture here. The other thing it can do, I mean, we've heard the term big data too much, okay? It's effectively, from a relational database developer's point of view, it's something that passed me by, because I could never justify putting the last 20 years printer log files onto an expensive SAN, okay? But things have changed, and commodity storage means now that you can store colossal volumes of lower value data more cheaply. And what Azure SQL Data Warehouse can do is it now allows you to process that data as well. So you can connect directly to your data in things like Hadoop or blob storage or data lake store. And you could do a thing called schema on read. So you create an external table and you say, this 20 million CSV files follow this pattern, and you just treat that as any other SQL table. You just write select statements against it. And Azure SQL Data Warehouse can handle that, and the purpose is so that you can do things like when you build an insurance quote, you can actually take car telemetry into account. Top speeds, average speeds, that type of thing. So here's an example of sort of architecture. It's not, you know, this is by no means the only way to tackle it, but this is kind of an architecture that people typically put Azure Data Warehouse in. So you'll have a selection of systems all feeding into something like blob storage potentially, which will then be put into the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which can then be scaled up, the task run, and then the results published to something like Azure Analysis Services. So if you're talking about a data warehouse workload, you can publish either to a data mart on Azure SQL, or you can publish to the OLAP-tuned, the BI-tuned Analysis Services cubes. That provides the lightning fast BI tooling, and you can then scale your machine back down again or put it back to sleep, and that's it. Okay. So have I blown anyone's mind yet? Okay, Cosmos DB, I'm going to take another sharp turn. So Cosmos DB, this is part of the NoSQL revolution, okay? So again, I'm from the relational world, so I sort of tried to not look at it because I didn't like the words NoSQL for a start. It seemed a little bit of an attack, right? But it actually just means not only SQL. It's not no as in definitely not. And there are some workloads that are just really better suited to this sort of tooling, okay? So Cosmos DB is Microsoft's managed service for doing NoSQL type workloads. The thing about this is Microsoft have spent an absolute fortune on this, and the reason they've done that is they use it themselves, okay? And it provides global distribution out of the box, so you're automatically distributed globally. So if you're developing, you know, in Edinburgh or Glasgow, if you're developing a piece of software or a service that you want to provide globally, this gives you global reach straight away, okay? Baked in. You have this concept of multi-model, or multimodal, I'm not sure which it is, a multi-API. So you have the key value pair type database. We also have the graph database that we provide a solution for. So is anybody familiar with graph databases? Okay. And then we also provide document databases, which is the one I'm particularly interested in at the moment, which is JSON objects. I mean, JSON has effectively replaced XML as a de facto standard for moving data around. And a document database is just completely focused on taking a JSON object and storing it, along with its million or billion or so other JSON documents, and allowing you to access that in a controlled manner. It will scale out independently, so if your Cosmos DB in New York is getting a lot more activity than the one in the New Zealand one, you speed up New York, you slow down New Zealand, okay, or Western Australia and Eastern US. Now, if you think about it, you're trying to maintain copies globally of your database. The issue of consistency globally becomes an issue. Okay, so if I make a change to my personal details, so say I'm based in New Zealand, and I make a change to my personal details, in terms of consistency, I've got traditionally two choices. I've got strong, which means I wait for every other copy to line up before I commit to that transaction, which means everything slows down. Or I go for eventual, which is basically, just, you know. Okay? So those are your two extremes that typically are supported. But in the middle, you have this concept of session, which means for anything I'm going to come in contact with again, you need to make sure that's consistent, right? So if I change my personal details, the next time I come back, I want to make sure that those personal details are the ones that I gave you, whilst the rest of the database then sets about maintaining the synchronization around the global distribution. And that's unique to Microsoft, the fact that we've got these tiered offerings around consistency. And then finally, and again, last but by no means least, is the speed element of this, okay? It's designed to provide blazingly fast performance. So you're looking at less than 10 milliseconds for read and less than 15 milliseconds for write. And that is at the 99th percentile, that means 99% of the time you'll get that. And we guarantee that. And we don't just guarantee that, we actually put our money where our mouth is with money back guarantees if we fail to hit it. So why? Why are these guarantees? Because we want serious players to use this tooling. We want people who want to build things like globally distributed mission critical apps, okay? So if you're going to build an entire business on this system effectively, you need to trust it, okay? So this is why we back it with guarantees. And similarly, it's very good for IoT, okay? Because it can scale instantly, it can handle these mixed workloads, these spiky workloads, and then because of document DB, not all your sensors are producing the same JSON. You know, a room temperature sensor doesn't send the same packet information out of as a mobile phone, okay? So it's this ability to handle different types of data. And the personalization, this speaks to the consistency piece. So the fact that you're able to do this global distribution but still maintain personal consistency. So one individual will never see the gaps in this replication that's going on behind the scenes. It's ideally suited for retail and e-commerce because of the nature of the beast, and then gaming. And there's a number of games. I think Dawn of the Living Dead, something like that, is one that's currently using this. Okay. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. You know, death by PowerPoint. Now I've tried to cover too much. I kind of regretted it when I started, but hey. So now I'm going to do a demo. Here's an example architecture that I've thrown together for an insurance company actually, which is to take some mobile telemetry, put that into Event Hub, which is a way of catching telemetry effectively. Used another technology called Streaming Analytics to persist that into Azure SQL Database, Cosmos DB, and SQL Data Warehouse, just to demonstrate that this stuff's working and able to ingest data at scale and speed. So I'm going to take you for a quick walk through Azure SQL. How am I doing for time, by the way? Am I all right? Okay. I feel like a jazz musician from the 20s. Okay, we're all seeing that? Very good. Second time lucky. Okay. So this is just an Azure portal, and what I thought I'd do is quickly take you through creating an Azure SQL database, creating an Azure SQL data warehouse, and creating an Azure Cosmos DB. So that sounds like the rest of your night's gone. Okay, so it's really just to sort of let you see how simple this stuff is, okay? So I'm going to create a SQL database. I give it a name. This is a URI, so it has to be unique globally. I will specify which resource group to put it in, but I'm also able to select here which database I want to start with. So I'm going to start with a blank database. I could start with a sample that we provide, or I could start with a backup. And that's a backup of an Azure SQL backup, not a traditional SQL.back file. Okay. I specify a server. Now the purpose of the server, rather than the database, the server is act as a metadata repository, right? So you can create one of these, and you only need the one. Right, you don't need to build a new server every time you create a database. Okay. So I've got one I already created earlier, so I'll just go with that. And then finally, and here's the interesting bit, is we can scale. Okay, so at this stage I can say that I'm wanting, I think it's 100 DTUs, which is costing me $150 a month. I can scale that down to 10, so it's $15 a month for a full-blown Azure SQL database. Yes, thank you so much. The database transaction unit, you mean? Yes. It used to be called a data throughput unit back when I was being taught about this. That seems to have been marketed now. It's a hybrid of compute, memory, and disk, effectively. So it's the ability to process transactions. It doesn't have a correlation in the real world. Okay, it's a hybrid term. But for the purposes of this, yeah, exactly. But we can certainly produce one that runs at $15 a month, or we can go absolutely mad and run one that's spending $930 a month. Okay, I'm not going to do either of those because I'll get in trouble. So that's it. That, at this stage I would hit create, and then that's me created my Azure SQL database. Right? I'm not going to do that because I've already done one already. Azure SQL Data Warehouse, for the benefits of time, is exactly the same process. You're just selecting Azure Data Warehouse. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a Cosmos DB. So this is the interesting bit. Please choose an API. So we've got a number of ways of storing your data and a number of ways of accessing your data. So in this instance, SQL is a document database, and we can use a thing called a hybrid of SQL, a dialect of SQL, to go and get your JSON document information. We've also got MongoDB. Now, does anybody here use Mongo or know Mongo? Okay, so DocumentDB or Azure Cosmos DB can store Mongo data, or data that can then be accessed via the Mongo API, which effectively means that if you wanted to migrate from a MongoDB to a managed service, all you would need to do would be to change the connection string on your application. And then we've got Cassandra. I plead ignorance, I don't know what Cassandra is. We've got Azure Tables, which I'm, what's that, sorry?
There's from DataStax is the company.
Right, okay. And then we've got Graph, where we're using the Gremlin APIs, okay? So in this case, I would select SQL, that gives me a document database. And here I can specify where that's going to reside, and I can also specify geo-redundancy. And that's it. I would hit create, and that would then create me a Cosmos database. So I will have just created a globally scalable, multimodal, high-performance database in sub 40 seconds. So what I think I might do now is I'll quickly show you what's going on inside. I'm going to jump straight to Cosmos, actually, because that's the interesting bit. I'll show you what's going on inside a Cosmos database, because I think this was kind of the penny dropped moment for me when I saw this. If I go to my Data Explorer, I can have a look at what's being stored within my Cosmos database. Now, I've created a little telemetry application to gather information about my latitude, longitude, speed, acceleration, deceleration, this type of stuff. And I've streamed that into my Cosmos database, a collection called telemetry. If I have a look at that, I can now see that that's my JSON object here, okay? So these are all stored by unique ID. Brilliant. But what we can also do, using a dialect of SQL, is you've got a whole set of SQL statements available to you as well. Everything from inner joins to aggregations, etc. So there's a vast array. It's a fully formed query language. So think about what that's doing. That's getting hold of my JSON document. It's looking at specific fields within that, specific attributes within that. It's tuning and indexing them and able to do aggregations on them as well. So to give you a further example, I could say,
if the documents all had different schemas, when you do a statement in the middle, how's it cool with that?
it's not the problem, is it? It's not its problem specifically. You know, it's about managing chaos, right? So if you have any control, then you would apply it. Yeah. If you have a requirement for control, then you would need to apply that. So if everything needed an ID, you would force it to have a particular type of ID. If it needed, I don't know, a particular metric in there, then you would have to just force that. But the database will work fine if you don't put it in. Okay? So it's all about this flexibility.
So that you can create different document types, just like different tables in a relational database, and have different document types.
Yes.
It's all those schemes.
Yes. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm interested where, for instance, my z-axis gyroscope is less than minus 0.5. So that's where I'll drop my phone, okay? So you kind of get the idea, right? So that's the type of thing that it's able to do. What I might do is I'm going to jump over to SQL Server Management Studio and just...
How do you find the RU?
Sorry?
How do you find the RUs for being predictable? We were using Gremlin, the Gremlin API, we found that to be a disaster. It felt like a random number generator.
I mean, the RU is 10K of activity, isn't it? 10K.
Well, yeah, but it's also like, so if you're running through an index, that counts towards your RU.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But I'm happy to speak to you afterwards, get your details, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so SQL Server Management Studio. And what I'm able to just really demonstrate here from Azure SQL and Azure SQL Data Warehouse is the experience is the same, okay? So I'm able to interrogate tables, etc., just in a normal run of things. So what I might do is just show you my little app, just to demonstrate this stuff does kind of work. Okay. So what this is doing, this is just gathering telemetry data from my phone in order to help, well, try and categorize my driving behavior and then be able to pass that on to an insurance company. Okay. So that's streaming data currently. So if I go to my Azure SQL database, I can create a new query to that, and I can say select count from Sybil telemetry. And we should be able to just watch that going up as this data is being ingested from my phone through to Azure SQL and Azure SQL Data Warehouse. And similarly, if I look at my Cosmos DB, I should be able to see something similar here. Okay, so jump back to my presentation. Questions? Thank you very much, by the way. Thank you for your time. Thank you for bearing with me. Thanks. So does anybody, I'm sure, okay. Any questions?
Did you miss data lake on purpose?
Sorry?
Did you miss out data lake on purpose?
I just didn't fool you. Appreciate it. Any other questions? So if I've got anyone's interest, has anybody seen something new today that's maybe making them think about tackling problems a different way? Oh, my work here is done.
I think that the security side for us, moving up to Azure SQL, looks really interesting from a GDPR perspective.
Yes.
Tick a lot of boxes there.
Yes.
Something we want to investigate that.
And I think vulnerability assessment is going to contain some kind of data categorization element as well, certainly in Management Studio.
When you mentioned the backups on, you said it was automatically backed up.
Azure SQL database, yeah.
Is
Well, you
that-
have to say, do my backups for me.
yeah, oh yeah, and you have to also have a storage account to store the backup.
I can't remember exactly what the dialogue is, but it's got to go somewhere, so yes, I would assume something
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
I just thought I might have missed something.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've not shown you everything, but I think the dialogue is basically say, yes, I'd like it backed up, and how long I'd like it to be kept for as well, and that can extend out for years, decades.
You can traditionally back up as well, just as you normally would with a SQL database. It doesn't just have to be the automatic mechanism inside.
You can take a traditional backup.
Yes.
Do you know, I don't know the answer to that. I guess.
You'll get charged for whatever you've taken out of Azure as well.
Right, yeah, because you've got your egress charges associated with that.
Yeah, you could get the backpack file and restore that to the regular SQL.
Yes, I suppose so, yeah. It's not a question that comes up very often.
One of the points you said actually to the self-maintenance, like indexing and kind of stuff, but there are like how SQL, whether it's an on-premises or an Azure, how SQL can know my application. If I'm running some enterprise application, does SQL really has the ability to know my application, that what kind of indexing and stuff needed, how it can maintain itself?
Yes, I mean, it obviously has to do that based on what it's seeing in terms of activity and response time. So this is like a query store, effectively, is being used in order to identify what's happening within your database and what your primary queries are, in order to then be able to say, okay, make an estimate about what the best plan is for that.
Assume I'm running an enterprise application, right? You don't know my application, you don't know what kind of form, reports and queries are user interfaces, what user is using. You don't know how the data is structured on the front end, right? Or how the data is required on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have no idea, like, I mean, that what kind of indexes are needed. You can say, keeping in mind the requirement of the user.
Mm-hmm.
That's only a developer can know what indexes are required really.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if a table is there, right, and only 3 fields are needed, I know that these 3 fields, a new index is required based on these fields.
Yeah.
So a person who's sitting on the SQL side, how that person can know without knowing my application that this many number of indexes.
Well, this is all based on experience, of course. Okay, so what the database tuning will do is it will just have to observe actual activity as it sees it. If you, every time you use your database, tackle it an entirely different way, then it's never going to be able to tune correctly to that. But typically, most of these things are repeated. They follow a pattern.
You're still going to start off with, you build a database, you'll index your tables, and then there may be some improvements on that.
Will you?
Make changes like that, adding indexes, and it decided that ultimately that was the wrong thing and it reverted.
Yes.
Or whatever. How would you know that these things had happened if you weren't sitting there observing it? Is there any way that can automatically let the administrators
It's a very good question. I would hope that it's logged, and I would hope that it's alerted, but I've not actually done it myself.
Okay.
You do get emails out to distribution, usually it recommends something. You've seen this.
So you
and
need to
these
set it up
fields are
again?
selected. This is an aware query, we recommend you do this. Part of the engine impact.
One thing, Microsoft is doing good job by handling the manageability. For example, people cannot access the Microsoft stuff is doing itself the backups and everything and maintenance and everything.
Yes.
But with some of the enterprise application, it's really a pain. Like you see the ERPs, Microsoft ERP lines, which is Dynamic 365, whether it's AX or CRM, new Dynamic 365 products are coming. Now what Microsoft is doing, they are locking the access to production SQL. I'm talking about Azure SQL, right? Now it's really a painful area. The thing is, the people who are sitting on the SQL side, Azure SQL side, honestly speaking, those people, okay, they know the database, but they have no idea about the application.
Okay.
Like this person who is working with the application have years of experience of working with the application. If I need to change one bit of data, one column, okay, I need to log a support request to Microsoft DSC, which will reply in 24 or 48 hours, and I don't have access to the production SQL. So Microsoft tells proudly that we are managing everything, but it's a pain in the end, because it's costing so much of money when I'm creating a support ticket and DSC replies me in 48 hours, which I can solve myself in 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
And this is related to dynamics and so on, yeah?
Entire line of Dynamics products, whether you talk of AX or GP or CRM or NAV or Talent or whatsoever new products are coming, right?
I mean, I'm afraid I can't speak for the Dynamics team. I'm a cloud solution architect, not a Dynamics specialist, but there is a trend towards having these systems managed themselves. And certainly from a developer's perspective, that should be a good thing, because that means you can be a little bit disinterested, if you like, about these things, and you can focus on the task at hand, which is developing good software. And from a DBA's perspective, there's a perception, I guess, of threat there, where a loss of power, if you like, where the engine's starting to do performance tuning itself. But then you have these other things coming out, like Cosmos DB, Azure Data Warehouse, so the world is changing. So from my point of view, what DBAs are needing to do over the next few years is going up the value chain, if you like, and becoming cloud data administrators, if you like, taking ownership of this larger ecosystem and bringing to bear the same rigor and the same structured approach, but just to a larger, broader set of tools.
One thing more which is creating confusion in my mind is like difference between entity store and this what you call it Cosmo DB.
Yes.
That makes me confused. Like in entity store as well, I can collect the data from different sources, like from Excel sheets, from SQL. Similarly, same I can see like it's happening in Cosmo DB.
Yes.
So what's the difference between entity store and Cosmo DB?
I don't know what entity store is. Is that the common data platform?
You can use, for example, behind the application, like for Power BI. Before sending data to Power BI, you can use it.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that, sorry.
It's also a Microsoft tool, I think, maybe.
There's about 100 of them at least. Okay, any more for any more?
On multi-tenancy in Azure SQL.
Yes.
Do you know the way where you can have tenant that, well, a login that could look at multiple tenants but not all of them?
I know this.
Look at my entire DB.
Yes.
But I want to say to somebody, well, you can look at this tenant, but not.
Okay. I know there's tooling for handling multiple tenants in terms of being able to submit database changes across a multiple data set. I would imagine that there's some tooling there. So again, if I get your details, I can get you some technical answers rather than some general ones. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Before I leave, we've got a quick quiz for you, son, and we've got a wee anchor power bar kind of giveaway. So
could you actually just give that straight to her?
So the quiz is on Kahoot. If you want to go to that website and put in that green pin, you can start. That one. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I think if you put it out and put it back in again, it's seemingly fixed it.
We all in? Yeah? Cool. So there's 6 questions, guys. So within the Azure portal, which 2 command line languages are available?
Go to table 560.
Next question is, what was the project code name for Azure? Third question is, when talking about Microsoft Azure Storage, what does the acronym GRS mean? Oh, only 8 got it right. New leader. What are the 2 key components that are needed within a JSON template? Oh, 4 right. Oh, new leader. What is the maximum password length when creating a virtual machine in Azure? Am I testing you, Stephen? Oh. And the last one, which percentage of Fortune 500 companies use Azure? Oh. Who's Big Mark? Well done. So I know who sideshow top. Is that you? Is that you, number 2? Aye. Here. And who's MCX?
Number 3.
There you go. So that's us, guys. Thank you again for your time, and hopefully see you in the new year.